The history of the 13th Amendment begins with the Civil War. The Civil War began with the North fighting for America's reunification, while the South fought for its independence. However, following the Emancipation Proclamation, the fight for the preservation of slavery in the South also became a key factor in the conflict between the Confederacy and the Union. The Union's idea was that if the Emancipation Proclamation was implemented, more previously enslaved individuals would join the Union Army, resulting in a greater chance of victory. The 13th Amendment was passed by the Senate in 1864 following the Civil War, but got held up in the House due to concerns about popular sovereignty and the role national government has in state governments. After Lincoln's re-election, there was a Republican majority in both chambers of Congress, which led to the House passing the 13th Amendment in a 119-56 vote on January 31, 1865, barely above the necessary two-thirds majority needed. A clause in the 13th Amendment allows for involuntary servitude as punishment for a convicted crime. This allows for a loophole for new forms of slavery to take hold. In fact, in 1871, the Virginia Supreme Court ruled in Ruffin v. Commonwealth that incarcerated people were legally indistinguishable from enslaved people, or, to quote the court, slaves of the state. The ideas of slavery were still very much so alive, even after slavery was abolished. Although the slaves were freed, the South was set on keeping their rigid racial hierarchy. To achieve this goal, black codes were implemented that evolved into Jim Crow laws post-Reconstruction. These black codes were intended to keep the recently freed slaves second to white Southerners. These black codes included laws that stated that masters, or white employers, were legally able to whip their black servants aged under 18 and needed permission from a judge after they turned 18. Servants, which were most often freed slaves, forced into labor contracts due to restrictions on getting other jobs because they could not practice any profession other than farming or servitude without a license from a judge, quitting before the end date of servitude would be arrested. Black individuals could be given the death penalty for crimes such as rebellion, arson, and burglary, while white individuals that committed those crimes often received a lighter sentence. There are many more laws that restricted the rights of previously enslaved individuals even after the 13th Amendment, but these are just a few examples of treatment allowed by the black codes. After Reconstruction, when Northern troops were withdrawn from the Deep South, the strides that Reconstruction made were removed through the Jim Crow laws and the KKK. Practices like literacy tests restricted the ability for black citizens to vote. Lynchings and fear tactics reminded black citizens that in the South, even after the victory of the North in the Civil War, racism and segregation were still very much so alive. Although today we don't have legal segregation, nor do we keep slaves in a historical sense, many practices and ideas remain in our society. One of the continuations of racism that we see today is the prison industrial complex. The prison industrial complex is defined as the attribution of the rapid expansion of the U.S. inmate population to the political influence of private prison companies and businesses that supply goods and services to government prison agencies for profit. Due to the impact of the punishment clause of the 13th Amendment and the continuation of racist ideals in our society, the proportion of black inmates to white inmates is startling. African Americans are incarcerated at an average rate of 5 times more frequently than white individuals. In 5 states, Iowa, Minnesota, New Jersey, Vermont, and Wisconsin, the proportion of African Americans incarcerated to white incarceration is 10-1, 10 times more black individuals than white. The controversy doesn't just stop at incarceration rates. This system is not by accident, and the statistics aren't the way they are because black people commit more crime. In actuality, this is a system designed specifically to carry racist ideology into our modern day. Nixon's domestic policy chief said, quote, "The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had 2 enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and the blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. Moving on from the incarceration rates, it's important to recognize the corruption within the prisons themselves. Unicor is a trade name for the Federal Prison Industry, or FPI, or better defined as prison workers. You may have heard that prisoners make your license plates, but that's not the only product they make, and you're not their only market. The FPI's federal government customers include departments, agencies, and boroughs such as the Department of Defense at 55% of the FPI's 2020 revenue, the Department of Justice 19%, the Department of Homeland Security 16%, and Social Security Administration 5%, as well as the Department of Agriculture at 1%. In 2020, the FPI employed 16,478 prisoners, with wages ranging from 23 cents to $1 and 15 cents an hour. In contrast to this dismal wage, the FPI's revenue in the first 2 business quarters was $8.5 million. Another aspect of the prison industrial complex is private prisons. A private prison is a prison where people are imprisoned by a third party that is contracted by a government agency for profit. 1 in 12 inmates are held in private prisons. Since 2000, there has been a 120% rise in the private prison population. This system exploits the cheap labor of incarcerated individuals, which is largely a black population, for the benefit of corporations and private owners. Some of the brands you consume on a daily basis might use prison labor, such as Nike, Walmart, and even Starbucks. With this in mind, it's important to think critically about the implications of the punishment clause of the 13th Amendment and what paths it has cleared for modern-day business practices. As of 2020, an amendment has been proposed to remove the punishment clause of the 13th Amendment due to its impact on modern business practice and the treatment of prisoners it has promoted. This amendment is called the Abolition Amendment. If passed, this could be a good step towards truly removing the practice of slavery and racism in the USA more than 100 years after the 13th Amendment was passed.